And this bill, I remember by saying, do you want us to clean up this contamination or not? It's been around for at least 10 years. There's been a bill, discussions in the department about providing a mechanism for a site that was contaminated years ago before there may have even been permits. Give us an incentive to clean it up. Everybody in the business community supported risk-based cleanups, but nothing seemed to happen year after year. When that got on the list from the business community to those new members of the General Assembly, they were like, what are we waiting on? We can do this. Senate Bill 781 has a whole bunch of stuff in it. So I've even broken it out for you so that each piece of Senate Bill 781 has something you can remember it by. The first portion that I'm going to talk about is if you believe this new rule cost your company a whole bunch of money that was not reflected in the cost-benefit assessment, then you can make that comment in the hearing. Historically, the cost-benefit's been done after the rule's already been out to public hearing and the commission's getting ready to adopt it. So process-wise, this was a big change. We call that the enough already. We got enough rules, don't do any more.
How do you price water correctly so that people use it appropriately and don't waste it? That's a common sense business notion that we all embrace, but not surprisingly, it's not been one that has been widely and fully accepted in the governmental circles where most of our water supply is delivered. So I think that's a place where we have a natural ability to be leaders and leaders of the conversation, and it will redound to our long-term benefit by increasing the supply. The best, cheapest way, there's no question, to increase supply is by reducing demand.
There were more penalties in 2010 in excess of $100,000 than a lot of prior years. Are we really trying to prevent workplace injuries, or are we just going to penalize people into spending money that a lot of companies really don't have right now for increased compliance? And so there's this big debate about whether OSHA should be spending more efforts and more money on counseling companies instead of sort of beating them over the head with penalties.
You heard Lou talk about some of the challenging environmental regulations. Let me say that EPA is working on more air regulations than any of the other media, by far. And a lot of these new regulations are impacting many more sources, many smaller sources. We're in the middle of dealing with the boiler GACT, for example. You all know that the boiler MACT, EPA announced it was reconsidering portions of the boiler MACT for the major sources, and then they stayed the boiler MACT for the major sources. They did not stay the boiler GACT, so there are sources out there that may have boilers that are affected by the boiler GACT. We sent out letters, over 500 letters to permitted facilities. Aside from that, there's up to about 2,200 other possibly affected boilers that are unpermitted, and we did send out postcards to them, as hopefully to inform them that this federal regulation is there and try and help them with compliance questions that they have.
This is a great illustration of some of the just crazy aggressive timeframes that EPA has agreed to for rulemaking. So EPA has agreed itself to issue a proposed rule in March, which they did, and a final rule in November of the same year, 8 months apart, for a regulation that affects half the generation in the country. It's truly incredible. What's the impact of the Utility MACT? Well, number one, which is not even up there, which is just a given, it's going to cost an enormous sum of money, billions and billions of dollars to retrofit all of these units. In fact, so much that many, many units will not be retrofit. Number one, you got time constraints. Many plants may simply have to be shut down because you could not physically get all the controls on in time. The compliance deadline is likely to be, and it depends on when the final rule comes out, but it's likely to be early 2015. So in early 2015, what we're looking at is some electric generating units that will have to stop operating simply because the controls have not been put on yet. They're in line for control, but they're not on yet, and you can't operate without the controls. We're also going to see units that have to be retired because the cost of installing these additional capital controls will be significant. You may see the investment of $1 billion at a single plant to come into compliance. Not all the plants out there can support that kind of additional investment. So you're going to see companies deciding we have to retire units instead of retrofitting them. What does that add up to? It adds up to a lot of generation going offline beginning in 2015 or 2016 if we get the one-year extension. Has EPA looked at the reliability impacts of this rule? And nobody's against environmental regulation, but there needs to be a balance. Aggressive timeframes, unnecessarily stringent regulations, they all have a time and place, but not when we're trying to get economic recovery started again. So what's the goal? Economic growth and clean air, and we've shown that it can be done.